Hello, I'm Ian Reams, and I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation over a study that goes over the effects of long-action antibiotic sprays on time of recovery for sheep for foot rot. So I'll be going over in this presentation some background on foot rot in sheep and why it's important that we find ways to cure it, and also be going over the study and giving my opinions at the end of the study. So like I said on the first slide, I'm going to go into some background before getting into the study of foot rot in sheep. Kind of go over the causes, what it does to your herd, and that kind of stuff. So the first thing to know when learning about foot rot is it's caused by a bacteria called Dicleobacter nodosus. That's the bacteria. It gets down in between the hooves, as you can see on the picture on the slide. It gets down in there and it starts to cause swelling and stuff. And if you look at the picture and you can just kind of see that it's not white, it's kind of all red in there, that's the foot rot starting. And it causes lameness, which you'll see them hobble around, not putting weight on one leg. Cause some odor. It's a hard smell to describe, but you'll know it as soon as you walk into a room of sheep. It kind of smells rotten. But in some cases, extreme cases, if it goes untreated and unmanaged, it can cause them to lay down, which means they're not moving around at all, which is not good for you, the farmer. Like I said earlier, this disease is very important to notice and treat. It's not going to kill your animals. It could possibly if you let it go very long and you don't manage it at all and don't decide not to treat your animals. It is one of the most common diseases in sheep. It's the one that you learn about more often, that and lip eczema, which is like bacteria that gets on their lips. Um, it is very common, but it is common in different breeds more prevalently. The meat breeds are more susceptible to it. Black-faced breeds like Hamp and Suffolk, they are very susceptible to it. Um, Hair breeds like Katahdins or Black Bellies, they do not get it as much because they're more less susceptible to getting it. But it does affect your production more than you think. So if you have a ewe that is limping around, not able to hold up her own weight, and you have her for breeding, she's not able to be bred by the male because she can't support him and her. It can affect lambs because they may not want to walk over to the feed and eat, and that's what you want them to do to build their body weight. So it's going to affect your production no matter what. So on this slide here, you may ask, well, what are some things that can cause foot rot in sheep? A lot of times it's improper management of hooves, as you can see on the picture on the slide. We have a man that is going ahead and managing the hooves. As you can see, when sheep's hooves grow out, they tend to curl up under their hoof, and that mud and stuff gets trapped away underneath, and it grows that bacteria, and that's what sinks down in the middle and causes the foot rot. Um, So you'd have to manage them, and as you see in the picture, he is managing them. You go through with these, they're kind of like pruning shears, and you go in there and you cut their foot flat so they can step on it and stuff. A lot of time, constant wet conditions will accelerate and make them more susceptible to getting foot rot. And also, if that soil is between 50 to 70 degrees, that's perfect conditions for them for the bacteria to grow. Um, But like I said earlier, um, you can do all of these and your sheep still get foot rot at some point. It's not completely preventable, but you can take steps to make it less common in your herd. If you have a herd and you have one sheep get it, that's pretty good odds for foot rot because it's so prevalent in sheep. So now let's get into some of the study details. So as an introduction, they're going to be evaluating three treatment options. The options were trimming, which is the most common way that we treat it now. They're going to use an NSAID, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, usually injectable. Um, and they're also going to be using some antibacterial administration, which they're using an oxytetracycline spray, which oxytetracycline is probably one of the most common antibacteria that we use in the animal industry, like LA200 or LA300. So those were the methods they're going to be using to treat the foot rot that they have in their study herd to examine for lameness. Also, in this study, they mentioned several times that there have been several tests ran in the United Kingdom, which is where this study takes place. They are one of the more popular nations for growing sheep. Several of the breeds that we have in the United States came from England at one point and are even named after counties in England. Also, one thing in England is it climately rains a lot. And they usually have wet soil. And even in Northern Ireland, which is part of England, they have bogs and stuff. And especially in England, they have these too, where the ground's just so wet and it's swampy. It really does manufacture the perfect conditions for foot rot. So that's why this study's done there, because it's very important there as well as here. But they do mention that there has never been any trials comparing these three treatment methods together. So it's kind of a first of its kind trial study. So some of the materials that they used in this study and some of the methods they used is they picked a farm located in England with a history of foot rot, which is important to know that their sheep are susceptible to it, and the environment is susceptible to culturing the bacteria to cause the sheep to get foot rot. They also picked 53 sheep at random, and they placed them in 6 different groups, 6 different treatment groups, and they treated them in different ways. Um, and obviously, they had their materials to treat. They had hoof trimmers, and they had their oxytetracycline spray, and their NSAIDs ready at the farm as well. And I don't know if I mention it later on, but they do have people come out that are trained in inspecting foot rot and lameness in the sheep. Like I said earlier, they have the 6 different groups and they have treated them in different ways. They have some groups that were trimmed on different days. They have some groups that were treated with just antibiotics. They had some groups that were treated with antibiotics and trimming, and some with just the NSAIDs. And they looked at their effects on their lameness and the lesions, because foot rot, I didn't mention earlier, it can cause lesions and openings in the foot, in that soft spot in between the hooves. So that's what they're looking at. That's the different ways they looked at treating them and how they treated them. So looking at this table here, this is kind of a breakdown of what they did with the groups of sheep and how they treated them. As you can see on the left side of the graph, or left side of the table, sorry, they show their treatment group number, and they also show the total at the bottom, so you can see where they totaled everything up. Um, and if you look at the top of the table, it shows you the different ways they treated them. As you can see, the first one says they just treated them with antibiotics on day 1 of diagnosing they had foot rot. Then there's the foot trimming on day 1. Then they do a foot trimming on day 6. And then they have a NSAID on day 1 of recognizing foot rot. And as you can see, they did a lot of the antibacterial study on all the groups except for 5 and 6. 5, they just did a trimming on day 1, and 6, they just did a trimming on day 6. So they kind of switched it up to try to get the results to see which ones worked better and which ones didn't, which one lowered time of recovery and which one didn't. So this slide, it talks more about the methods that they used. They had people come out that are trained in recognizing foot rot, and they score it. And they also score the locomotion, which is their movement. So these people would come out and they'd write their scores down on how they moved and how the lesions looked, if they looked better, if they looked worse, if they didn't look any different, and the same with the motion. But they had all this information and they inputted it into a own mathematical equation. I cannot tell you what all the exponents and stuff are. I can kind of basically describe it. Um, they enter the information and it gives them a ratio at the end. And I have broken down in a later slide the ratios that they came to at the end of their study. In the previous slide, I said they enter their information, that the data they've collected, into that formula, and they come out with a ratio. These are their ratios after running through their formula for the whole study. So, and in the ratios, the higher, the more effective it was. They came out with antibiotics. Lameness, they give it a 4.92, and lesions a 5.11. In trimming on day 1, the lameness was a 0.05 and a lesion was a 0.06 ratio. And trimming on day 6 was a little more effective. They had a lameness of 0.07 and lesions of 0.07. They did find, after running all their data, that NSAIDs had no significant effect on curing the lesions or the lameness in the sheep. So on this slide, I give their conclusion, and then I will kind of give you my conclusion on what I think the study results say. Their conclusion is, if foot trimming on day 1 and 6 were stopped and antibacterial were used, then over 1 million sheep in England would recover more rapidly. That is correct. Antibacterial does work really well because the bacteria causes inflammation. Antibacterial will kill the bacteria. So it works very well. But I'd like to include in their conclusion that if they use proper maintenance and trim your sheep's feet, and when they get foot rot, if you use the antibacterial spray that they used, or any that are similar to it that are antibacterial, that would cause the millions of sheep in England to recover much more rapidly and maybe prevent a bunch of it from happening in the first place, which I think would be a win-win for everyone.